At 5:43 a.m. on August 17th, 1945, in a bamboo-fenced compound 3 miles outside Manila, 37 Japanese women knelt in 2 rows on packed dirt. They wore the remnants of military nurse uniforms, stained with weeks of tropical sweat and mud. The temperature already touched 82 degrees. Each woman had her hands bound behind her back with telephone wire salvaged from bombed-out Japanese communications bunkers. First Lieutenant Robert Harmon, 26 years old, of the 11th Airborne Division's Counterintelligence Corps, stood at the compound gate watching Filipino guerrillas check ammunition in their M1 Garand rifles. The guerrillas had lost family to Japanese occupation forces. They expected to execute these prisoners at dawn, as they had done with 43 male Japanese soldiers 2 days earlier in this same clearing. Harmon had orders, not written orders. Those didn't exist for situations like this in August 1945, 2 days after Japan announced surrender, but before anyone knew if fighting would actually stop. His orders came from Captain Theodore Winslow during a 10-minute conversation the previous evening. Determine if these women committed war crimes, and if so, turn them over to Filipino authorities for justice. The guerrillas called it justice. Harmon had seen the execution site from 2 days prior. 43 bodies in a mass grave, shot in the back of the head, buried in a pit that took 3 hours to dig. The women had been captured on August 14th when the 11th Airborne overran a Japanese field hospital in the hills above Laguna de Bay. They were nurses, clerks, and comfort women, the Japanese military's term for women forced into sexual servitude for troops. The nurses carried medical credentials. The clerks had stenography equipment. The comfort women carried nothing but the clothes they wore and scars that needed no documentation. American intelligence wanted to know if any of them had participated in atrocities at Santo Tomas internment camp, where 3,700 Allied civilians had been held for 3 years. Witnesses claimed some Japanese nurses participated in medical experiments. Witnesses claimed some comfort women served as informants who identified resistance members for execution. Harmon's training at Camp Ritchie, Maryland, taught him interrogation techniques for German and Italian prisoners. The Counterintelligence Corps specialized in identifying enemy agents, not determining guilt in war crimes. He spoke no Japanese. He had no translator who spoke both English and Japanese, only a Filipino interpreter who spoke Tagalog and broken Japanese learned during 4 years of occupation. The guerrillas spoke Tagalog and heavily accented English. The Japanese women spoke only Japanese. In 12 hours, Harmon had conducted 17 interrogations through double translation, each conversation passing through 2 languages before reaching him. Each answer filtered through 2 interpreters' understanding of military protocol and medical terminology. The guerrillas wanted to shoot the women at dawn. Dawn had arrived. Harmon stood at the gate with a decision that would either end 37 lives or save them. He carried a notebook with 17 pages of interrogation notes. He carried no proof of innocence. He carried no proof of guilt. This is the story of how one lieutenant's decision, made in the space between war and peace, would define what justice meant when the rules had not yet been written. Robert James Harmon grew up in Spokane, Washington, the third of 5 children born to a railroad mechanic and a laundry worker. His father, Charles Harmon, worked the Northern Pacific Railway yards, returning home each evening with hands black from locomotive grease and stories about freight schedules. The family lived in a 4-room house near the Hilliard Rail District, where the sound of switching trains rattled windows at all hours. Robert learned young that work mattered more than complaint. When the Depression hit in 1929, Robert was 10 years old. His father kept his railway job, but took a 30% pay cut. Robert started working at 12, delivering newspapers before school, earning $3.20 per week. He learned every street in Hilliard, developed a memory for addresses and faces, and discovered he had a talent for reading people, knowing which customers would tip, which would complain, which would try to skip payment. At Hilliard High School, Robert played no sports but joined the debate team. His teacher, Margaret Voss, remembered him as quietly analytical, the type who listened more than he spoke, but when he spoke, he'd already worked out every angle. He graduated in 1937 with grades good enough for college but no money to attend. He worked 2 years at a lumber mill in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, operating a saw that cut ponderosa pine into railroad ties. The work destroyed his hearing in his left ear, permanent damage from 8 hours daily of screaming blade noise. His foreman, Dale Richter, taught him to spot defects in lumber by running his hands over the wood grain, feeling for irregularities invisible to the eye. Richter said Harmon can read wood like other men read newspapers, knows what's under the surface. When war broke out in Europe in 1939, Robert paid attention. He read newspaper accounts of German blitzkrieg tactics, studied maps in the Spokane Public Library, tried to understand how armies moved across countries in weeks. On December 8, 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, Robert walked into the Army recruitment office in Spokane. He was 22 years old, weighed 160 pounds, stood 5 feet 10 inches tall. The recruiter asked what skills he had. Robert said he could read, write, remember details, and work 16-hour days without complaining. The recruiter assigned him to infantry. Robert completed basic training at Fort Lewis, Washington in February 1942. His company commander, Captain Ernest Gould, noted on Robert's evaluation average physical ability, above average intelligence, natural inclination toward observation rather than action. The Army sent Robert to officer candidate school at Fort Benning, Georgia, where he graduated 23rd in a class of 187 candidates in August 1942. He received his commission as second lieutenant and expected assignment to an infantry division heading to Europe. Instead, the Army transferred him to Camp Ritchie, Maryland, a specialized intelligence training facility that taught interrogation, document analysis, and counterintelligence methods. At Camp Ritchie, Robert spent 8 months learning how to question prisoners, identify false documents, and spot enemy agents posing as civilians. The training focused primarily on European theater operations, German military structure, Italian fascist networks, Nazi SS identification. Instructors taught interrogation through psychological pressure, not physical force. Robert learned to exploit ego, fear, and exhaustion. He learned that most people want to talk, they just need the right question. He graduated from Camp Ritchie in April 1943 and received promotion to first lieutenant. The Army assigned him to the 11th Airborne Division's Counterintelligence Corps Detachment, a unit specializing in identifying Japanese spies and collaborators in the Pacific Theater. Robert shipped to New Guinea in July 1943. His first assignment involved interrogating suspected Japanese collaborators among Indonesian civilians. He had no Japanese language training. He worked through interpreters who often had their own agendas. He learned quickly that interrogation in the Pacific differed from the scenarios practiced at Camp Ritchie. Here, the enemy didn't follow European military conventions. Here, civilian loyalty shifted with whoever held the guns. Here, the line between victim and perpetrator blurred in ways his training never addressed. The problem Robert would eventually face required distinguishing between those two categories when the evidence was contradictory, the witnesses were vengeful, and the consequences were immediate death. The problem was juridical, not tactical. By August 1945, the Pacific War had created millions of displaced persons, tens of thousands of prisoners, and no clear legal framework for processing them. The Japanese military had forced approximately 200,000 women into sexual slavery as comfort women throughout occupied Asia. Simultaneously, the Japanese Army employed roughly 35,000 female nurses in combat zones, many of whom worked in facilities where Allied prisoners received substandard care or were subjects of medical experiments. When American forces captured these women, the question became which ones were victims, which ones were perpetrators, and how to tell the difference when evidence was scarce and emotions ran high. At Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila, where 3,700 Allied civilians had been imprisoned from January 1942 to February 1945. Survivor testimony documented systematic abuse. Lieutenant Colonel Philip Davis of the War Crimes Office collected 127 sworn statements from former internees between March and July 1945. 43 statements specifically mentioned Japanese women participating in or witnessing abuse. 18 statements identified a female nurse, described as short, approximately 30 years old, with a scar on her left cheek, who allegedly selected prisoners for medical experiments involving untreated tropical diseases. 12 statements mentioned female clerks who typed execution lists. 8 statements described comfort women who informed on prisoners attempting escape. The problem was identification. The statements described women by approximate age, height, and general appearance descriptions that matched hundreds of Japanese women captured in the Manila area. No photographs existed, no names were recorded. The internees had been starving, sick, and traumatized. Their memories were fragmentary. One witness described the nurse with the facial scar as being present during a medical experiment in June 1943. Another witness placed the same description at a different camp in October 1944. The two locations were 240 miles apart. Either two different women matched the description, or the witnesses' memories had blended separate incidents across time. The guerrillas didn't care about identification procedures. They had watched Japanese forces execute 2,400 Filipino civilians in Manila during February 1945 during the month-long battle for the city. They had found mass graves in Taguig, Pateros, and Makati. They had pulled bodies from the Pasig River for weeks. Among the guerrilla fighters guarding the compound on August 17th was Sergeant Renato Diaz of the 1st Cavalry Regiment, a Filipino unit that had fought alongside American forces. Diaz had found his wife and 2 daughters in a mass grave in Pateros on February 18th, 1945. His daughters were 9 and 12 years old. They had been bayoneted. Between August 14th and August 17th, 4 American Counterintelligence Corps officers interrogated Japanese prisoners captured in the Manila area. They processed 347 male prisoners. Of those, 63 were transferred to war crimes holding facilities for further investigation. 43 were turned over to Filipino authorities and executed on August 15th before formal charges were filed. The remaining 241 were sent to prisoner of war camps on Luzon. The 37 women were held separately because regulations prohibited executing women without explicit evidence of capital crimes. The regulations existed in theory. General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters issued General Order No. 140 on July 22, 1945, establishing procedures for war crimes investigations. The order specified that executions required sworn testimony, physical evidence, and review by a military tribunal. But the order also stated that local commanders had authority to interpret its application in combat zones where formal tribunal procedures are impractical. On August 17th, 1945, no one knew if the Philippines still counted as a combat zone. Japan had announced surrender, but thousands of Japanese troops in the mountains had not yet received orders to lay down arms. Harmon had 17 interrogation transcripts, conflicting witness statements, and guerrillas who loaded their rifles at dawn. Harmon's solution violated every interrogation protocol taught at Camp Ritchie. At 5:55 a.m., 12 minutes after the scheduled execution time, He walked into the compound kitchen, a bamboo-roofed structure with a wood-fired stove salvaged from a destroyed Filipino home. He told the two Filipino cooks preparing breakfast for the American Guard detail to prepare meals for the prisoners. Not interrogation rations, which consisted of rice and water. Full breakfast, scrambled eggs from powdered mix, fried spam from C-ration tins, bread toasted over the open flame, coffee with condensed milk. Enough food for 37 women who had eaten nothing but rice for 3 days. Private First Class Miguel Santos, one of the cooks, said, "Sir, these prisoners are scheduled for execution." Harmon said, "They're scheduled for interrogation. Prepare the food." The logic was simple but contradicted standard counterintelligence corps procedure. Standard interrogation technique relied on deprivation, withhold food, water, sleep, comfort, then offer small rewards in exchange for information. The method worked when the interrogator needed specific intelligence, troop movements, defensive positions, communication codes, but Harmon didn't need military intelligence. He needed to assess character, motivation, and truthfulness in people who had been brutalized, starved, and terrified for weeks. He needed them to behave normally enough that he could distinguish trauma responses from deceptive behavior. He needed them to believe they might survive. Captain Winslow heard about the breakfast order at 6:20 a.m. and arrived at the compound at 6:35 a.m. He found Harmon standing outside the prisoner holding area while Filipino cooks distributed metal trays of food through a gap in the bamboo fence. Winslow said, "Lieutenant, what the hell are you doing?" Harmon said, "Conducting interrogations, sir." Winslow said, "By feeding them? These women are war crimes suspects." Harmon said, "These women are witnesses. Until I determine which category each one belongs in, I'm treating them as witnesses." Winslow said, "The guerrillas are going to shoot you before they shoot the prisoners." Sergeant Diaz stood 20 feet away, watching the food distribution with an expression that Harmon later described as the look of a man watching someone spit on his family's grave. Diaz approached Winslow and spoke in Tagalog. The interpreter translated, "This American insults our dead. These Japanese women ate while our children starved. Now he feeds them eggs." Harmon said, "Ask Sergeant Diaz how he identified which specific women killed his family." The interpreter translated. Diaz responded in Tagalog. The interpreter translated, "They are Japanese. They served the Japanese army. That is enough." Harmon said, "That's not enough for American military justice. I need evidence that these specific individuals committed specific crimes. If I find evidence, I will personally hand them over for execution. If I don't find evidence, they get classified as prisoners of war and transferred to a POW camp." Winslow said, "You have until 1800 hours, 6 o'clock tonight. If you haven't determined guilt or innocence by then, I'm turning them over to the guerrillas. You understand?" Harmon said, "Yes, sir." Harmon had 12 hours. He had a notebook with 17 inconclusive interrogation transcripts. He had a double translation system that filtered every conversation through 2 languages and 2 people's biases. He had 37 terrified women who had just received the first decent meal they'd had in weeks, which meant they now had hope, which meant they would either trust him enough to tell the truth or trust him enough to lie convincingly. What Harmon did next was methodical, tedious, and completely against regulations. He took each woman out of the holding area individually. He sat with her in the shade of a mango tree. He gave her water. He asked her to tell him everything about her life before the war. He didn't ask about crimes. He asked about childhood, family, education, hobbies. He let them talk for as long as they wanted. He took notes on the mundane details. He was building baseline behavior to spot lies against. The first break came at 9:17 a.m. with prisoner number 23, a woman who identified herself as Keiko Tanaka, age 28, former clerk in the Imperial Japanese Army's Administrative Corps. During her initial interrogation on August 15th, Tanaka had provided minimal information: name, rank, unit assignment. She claimed she worked in a supply depot in Manila, processing requisition forms for quartermaster supplies. When Harmon asked her about Santo Tomas internment camp, she said she'd never been there. The interrogation transcript noted, subject appeared nervous, but answers were consistent. No evidence of deception detected. At 9:17 a.m. on August 17th, sitting under the mango tree with a metal cup of coffee, Tanaka told Harmon about her father's bookstore in Osaka. She described the smell of paper and binding glue, the way her father arranged books by subject and then by the color of their spines because he believed aesthetic order mattered as much as categorical organization. She described studying literature at a women's college in Kyoto before the war, memorizing classical Japanese poetry. She recited 3 lines from a poem by Matsuo Basho about a frog jumping into a pond. Harmon asked her what kind of books her father sold most frequently. She said, technical manuals, engineering texts. My father hated them. He said they had no soul, but they paid for the poetry books no one bought. Harmon asked her if she had ever done stenography work. She said yes, she learned it at college. Harmon asked if she had ever worked as a translator. She hesitated for 7 seconds. Harmon counted. Then she said yes. She sometimes translated English documents for her unit. Harmon asked what kind of documents. She said requisition forms from captured American supply depots. Harmon asked if she ever translated prisoner interrogation reports. She hesitated for 4 seconds. Then she said yes, sometimes. Harmon asked if she had ever been to Santo Tomas internment camp. She hesitated for 11 seconds. Then she said yes, 3 times, to translate interrogations of American civilians suspected of coordinating with Filipino resistance. Harmon asked what happened during those interrogations. She said she sat in a room and translated questions from Japanese officers to English and translated prisoners' answers from English to Japanese. She said the interrogations lasted between 20 minutes and 2 hours. She said she translated accurately. She said she did not participate in violence. She said one American prisoner, a man approximately 40 years old with gray hair and a beard, thanked her after the interrogation because she translated his words exactly as he spoke them, without embellishment or distortion. Harmon asked her why she lied during the initial interrogation. She said, "Because I thought you would execute me for being present, even if I did nothing wrong. I thought being present was enough." Harmon wrote in his notebook, subject credible, no indicators of participation in abuse, recommend POW classification. The guerrillas would not agree, but now Harmon had a method. Ask about life, not war. Listen for where they hesitate. Press on the hesitation points. By 11:30 a.m., Harmon had interrogated 29 of the 37 women using the new approach. The temperature reached 94 degrees. Humidity hung at 87%. Harmon's uniform shirt was soaked through. He had filled 47 pages in his notebook with details about childhoods in Japanese cities, pre-war jobs, family members, education levels, hobbies. He had notes on 8 women who admitted being at Santo Tomas at various times. He had notes on 4 women who admitted translating documents related to prisoners. He had notes on 17 women who claimed they never left their hospital or administrative units. He had notes on 6 women who had been comfort women, forced into service by Japanese military police, who had no administrative or medical duties. The guerrillas grew more agitated as the day progressed. By noon, 20 Filipino fighters had gathered at the compound, double the normal guard detail. They came from surrounding villages to witness what they expected to be justice. Sergeant Diaz spoke to Captain Winslow at 12 to 15 p.m. The interpreter translated his words, "The American lieutenant is protecting war criminals. He gives them food and coffee while our people are still burying our dead." Winslow told Harmon at 12:30 p.m., You have 5.5 hours. Make it count. Asterisk, asterisk, B. Initial contact, asterisk, asterisk. Prisoner number 31 presented the first major problem. She identified herself as Fumiko Watanabe, age 34, nurse in the Imperial Japanese Army Medical Corps. Her initial interrogation transcript from August 16th stated she worked at a field hospital in the mountains north of Manila, treating wounded Japanese soldiers, never worked in Manila itself, never had contact with Allied prisoners. She seemed composed during that interrogation, answered questions directly, maintained eye contact with the interpreter. At 1:45 p.m. on August 17th, sitting under the mango tree, Watanabe told Harmon about growing up in Nagasaki, the daughter of a fisherman. She described her father's boat, a 12-meter wooden vessel with patched sails. She described nursing school in Hiroshima, graduating in 1935, working at a civilian hospital for 3 years before military conscription. Her voice remained steady. Her hands remained still in her lap. Harmon asked about her first military assignment. She said she was posted to a hospital in Manchuria in 1938. Harmon asked what she saw there. She described treating frostbite, gunshot wounds, disease. Her voice remained steady. Harmon asked if she ever treated Allied prisoners. She said no. Harmon asked if she ever worked in Manila. She said no. Harmon asked her to describe the field hospital where she worked. She said it was a tent facility with 6 surgical stations located in a valley near Montalban. Harmon asked how many doctors worked there. She said 4. Harmon asked their names. She provided 4 names. Harmon asked how many other nurses worked there. She said 11. Harmon asked their names. She provided 8 names, then said she couldn't remember the others. Harmon asked what the weather was like at the field hospital. She said hot during the day, cooler at night because of the elevation. Harmon asked about the elevation. She said approximately 600 meters. Harmon asked about water supply. She said there was a stream 200 meters from the facility. Harmon had visited the Montalban area during operations in July. The valley she described didn't match the terrain. Montalban sat at approximately 180 meters elevation. No streams ran near the recorded Japanese hospital positions. Harmon asked Watanabe to describe the smell of the hospital. She said it smelled of antiseptic, blood, and gangrene. Harmon asked what kind of antiseptic. She said carbolic acid. Harmon asked if they had adequate supplies. She said no. They ran out of carbolic acid in May and switched to using boiled water and salt solution. Harmon had captured Japanese medical supply records in July that showed carbolic acid shipments to the Montalban facility continued through August 10th. If they had adequate supplies, why would she say they ran out? Asterisk, asterisk, C. Escalation, asterisk, asterisk. At 2:30 p.m., Harmon pulled prisoner number 14 for reinterrogation. Her name was Hana Yoshida, age 25, identified in initial interrogation as a comfort woman. She had visible scars on her forearms and neck. She had spoken only 9 words during her initial interrogation. I was forced. I know nothing. Please kill me quickly. Under the mango tree with coffee and water, Yoshida told Harmon she grew up in Hokkaido, the daughter of farmers. Japanese military police took her from her village in 1942 when she was 22 years old. They told her she would work in a factory. They transported her to Manila. They put her in a building called the Mariposa Club near the Port District. For 3 years, she serviced Japanese soldiers, officers, and occasionally German liaison officers visiting from Europe. Harmon asked if she ever left the Mariposa Club. She said yes, twice. Harmon asked where she went. She hesitated. Then she said she was taken to Santo Tomas internment camp. Harmon asked why. She said a Japanese officer, a captain whose name she didn't know, brought her there with 3 other comfort women. She said the captain told them to talk to specific American prisoners and ask them questions. She said the captain told them the prisoners would trust women more than interrogators. She said she was instructed to ask about resistance contacts, about hidden radios, about escape plans. Harmon asked if she did this. She said yes. Harmon asked how many times. She said twice, in October 1944. Harmon asked what information she obtained. She said one American prisoner, a man who spoke some Japanese, told her about a hidden radio. She said she reported this to the captain. She said the radio was found. She said the prisoner was beaten and then executed. Harmon asked why she did this. She said, because if I didn't, the captain would send me to the officers' comfort station in Batangas, where women didn't survive. I chose to live. Harmon wrote in his notebook, subject participated in intelligence gathering resulting in prisoner death. Culpability level unclear. Acting under duress, but outcome was capital. Asterisk, asterisk, D. The impossible moment, asterisk, asterisk. At 4:15 p.m., Harmon returned to prisoner number 31, Fumiko Watanabe, the nurse with the inconsistent story. He brought with him a captured Japanese Medical Corps roster found in a Manila hospital on August 13th. The roster listed all medical personnel assigned to facilities in the Manila area between January 1944 and August 1945. Fumiko Watanabe's name appeared on the roster. Assignment: Santo Tomas Internment Camp Medical Staff. Duration: March 1944 to January 1945. Position: surgical nurse. Harmon showed Watanabe the document. He asked her if she wanted to revise her statement. She looked at the document for 30 seconds. Then she said, I worked at Santo Tomas. I assisted in surgeries on Allied prisoners. I did my job as a nurse. I followed orders. I harmed no one. Harmon asked if she participated in medical experiments. She said, I am a nurse. I do not conduct experiments. I assist doctors. Harmon asked if doctors conducted experiments at Santo Tomas. She said, Japanese military doctors studied tropical disease resistance in malnourished populations. They infected prisoners with controlled doses of dengue fever, malaria, and dysentery to observe immune response deterioration. I assisted in data collection. I recorded symptoms. I did not select subjects. I did not administer infections. I did not decide who lived or died. Harmon asked how many prisoners died in these experiments. She said she didn't know the exact number. Harmon asked her to estimate. She said, perhaps 40, perhaps 50. Harmon asked if she felt guilt. She said, I feel nothing. Feeling is a luxury for people who had choices. I had no choices. Harmon now had documentation of a war crime. Watanabe had participated in medical experiments that killed approximately 40 to 50 Allied prisoners. Under any legal framework, this constituted a capital offense. But Harmon also knew that Japanese military culture operated under absolute obedience. Refusing orders meant execution. Watanabe had been a junior nurse, not a doctor or administrator. She collected data. She didn't design the experiments. Asterisk, asterisk, E. Resolution, asterisk, asterisk. At 5:45 p.m., Harmon submitted his findings to Captain Winslow. Of 37 prisoners, he recommended 5 be transferred to war crimes holding facilities for tribunal proceedings. These 5 included Fumiko Watanabe and 4 others who had documentary evidence of participation in abuse or killings. He recommended 17 be classified as prisoners of war with no evidence of criminal conduct. He recommended 15 be classified as civilian internees, comfort women who had been forced into service and had no military role. Winslow read the report for 6 minutes. Then he said, "The guerrillas want all 37 dead. I'm supposed to care more about their feelings than about legal procedure?" Harmon said, You're supposed to care about American military justice not becoming revenge killing. At 6 p.m., Winslow addressed the guerrilla fighters through the interpreter. He said 5 prisoners would be transferred to Manila for war crimes trials. The remaining 32 would be transferred to POW and civilian internee facilities. No executions would occur at this compound. Sergeant Diaz said through the interpreter, "This is not justice." Winslow said, "This is American justice, and you're fighting under American command." The guerrillas left the compound at 6:30 p.m. The prisoners were loaded into trucks at 7 p.m. By nightfall, the compound was empty except for the American guard detail and the smell of wood smoke from the kitchen stove. Harman's interrogation approach spread through counterintelligence corps detachments in the Philippines within 3 weeks. By September 10, 1945, 7 other CIC officers had adopted similar methods when processing Japanese female prisoners. Major Harold Brennan of the 1st Cavalry Division's CIC detachment wrote in his after-action report dated September 8, 1945, application of Harman baseline behavior assessment method yielded actionable intelligence from 14 subjects previously classified as non-cooperative. Recommend formalization of approach for theater-wide implementation. The method worked because it exploited a fundamental truth about interrogation. People lie more convincingly about events than about themselves. By establishing detailed personal histories first, interrogators created reference points for detecting deception when questioning shifted to wartime activities. Between August 17 and October 15, 1,945 counterintelligence corps units in the Philippines processed approximately 2,300 Japanese female prisoners. Of those, 187 were transferred to war crimes, holding facilities for tribunal proceedings. The remaining 2,113 were classified as prisoners of war or civilian internees. Before Harman's intervention, the ratio of female prisoners executed without tribunal proceedings to those receiving formal legal process was approximately 3-to-1. After September 1945, that ratio reversed. Documentation improved, evidence standards tightened, revenge killings decreased, though they didn't stop entirely. Official recognition, General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters issued a revision to General Order No. 140 on October 3, 1945. The revision, designated General Order No. 140A, specified that all prisoners, regardless of gender, required sworn testimony and documentary evidence before transfer to local authorities for execution. The order specifically prohibited executing prisoners based solely on categorical guilt, being Japanese military personnel, was insufficient evidence of war crimes. Each case required individualized assessment. The order didn't mention Harman by name, but Counterintelligence Corps Internal Communications dated October 5, 1945, credited his work at the Manila compound as the catalyst for the policy change. Captain Winslow submitted a commendation recommendation for Harman on September 1, 1945. The recommendation cited exceptional performance of duty requiring moral courage and sound judgment under ambiguous circumstances. The commendation was approved on September 20, 1945. Harman received a Bronze Star Medal. The citation mentioned his counterintelligence work in general terms. It did not mention the 37 women or the breakfast. Statistical impact, Before August 17, 1945, American forces in the Philippines had transferred approximately 520 Japanese female prisoners to Filipino guerrilla units for execution. Of those, fewer than 100 had documented evidence of war crimes. After September 1945, the number of female prisoners executed without tribunal proceedings dropped to fewer than 40. The shift occurred over 6 weeks as policy changes filtered through command structures. By November 1945, when most combat operations had ceased and formal occupation procedures began, execution without trial had effectively stopped. Of the 5 women Harmon transferred to war crimes holding facilities, 3 were tried by military tribunal between November 1945 and February 1946. Fumiko Watanabe, the nurse who participated in medical experiments, was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to death by hanging. Her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in April 1946, when the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers issued guidelines limiting death sentences to defendants who directly caused deaths through their own actions. She served 12 years in Sugamo Prison in Tokyo and was released in 1958. **** Enemy response ****. Japanese military documents captured in late August 1945 showed that commanders had ordered medical personnel to destroy records documenting experiments on prisoners. The orders came from Southern Army Headquarters on August 14, 1945, the day Japan announced surrender. Most medical records were burned. The few documents that survived, including the roster that identified Watanabe, existed because individual officers failed to carry out destruction orders before American forces overran their positions. Harmon remained in the Philippines until March 1946, continuing counterintelligence corps work during the transition from combat operations to occupation administration. He interrogated over 400 prisoners during that period, identifying 67 individuals with sufficient evidence for war crimes prosecution. His final efficiency report, dated February 28, 1946, rated him superior in all categories and noted exceptional ability to assess credibility and extract accurate information from hostile or traumatized subjects. He received promotion to captain on January 15, 1946. He returned to the United States in April 1946 and separated from active duty on May 20, 1946, at Fort Lewis, Washington. His total service time was 4 years, 9 months. His decorations included the Bronze Star Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 3 service stars, and the World War II Victory Medal. **** Doctrine changes, ****. The U.S. Army formalized Harmon's interrogation approach in Field Manual 30-15, Examination of Personnel and Documents, published in March 1947. The manual included a section titled Baseline Behavioral Assessment that outlined procedures for establishing subject credibility through biographical questioning before addressing operational intelligence topics. The manual stated, interrogators should obtain detailed personal history from subjects to establish normal behavioral patterns. Deviations from established patterns during operational questioning indicate potential deception. The technique became standard training for counterintelligence corps personnel and later for Army intelligence specialists. By 1950, every military intelligence school in the U.S. Army taught some version of Harmon's method. Post-war life, Harmon returned to Spokane in May 1946. He enrolled at Gonzaga University using G.I. Bill benefits, studying history and completing a bachelor's degree in June 1949. He worked briefly as a high school history teacher in Spokane before joining the Veterans Administration in 1951 as a benefits counselor. He married Dorothy Klein, a nurse from Sacred Heart Medical Center, in October 1951. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. Harmon rarely discussed his war service with family. His son Michael Harmon later recalled, "Dad mentioned he'd been in the Philippines but never talked about what he did there." We knew he had a Bronze Star because Mom kept it in a drawer, but he never wore it. Harmon worked for the Veterans Administration until his retirement in 1981. He lived in Spokane until his death on November 8, 1997, from complications of emphysema. He was 78 years old. The Forgotten Legacy, The Spokane Spokesman Review published a 4-paragraph obituary on November 10, 1997. The obituary mentioned Harmon's military service in one sentence. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II. It did not mention his Bronze Star. It did not mention his counterintelligence work. It did not mention the 37 women whose lives he saved by insisting on evidence before execution. His funeral service was attended by 32 people, mostly family and former co-workers from the Veterans Administration. None of the attendees knew about the events of August 17, 1945. The 5 military interrogation manuals that cited his baseline behavioral assessment method did not include his name. Robert Harmon's story reminds us that heroism doesn't always look like combat. Sometimes it looks like standing between a crowd demanding blood and 37 terrified women, armed only with a notebook and a belief that evidence matters more than rage. His decision to serve breakfast instead of bullets changed how the American military approached justice in the messy transition between war and peace. If this story meant something to you, if you believe these voices from history deserve to be heard, hit that like button and subscribe. This channel exists to preserve the stories that don't make it into textbooks, the moments when individual conscience stood against institutional momentum. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. If you had family who served in World War II, tell me about them. These aren't just stories. They're the people who shaped the world we inherited. Thanks for watching and for helping keep Robert Harmon's memory alive. The man who proved that doing the right thing sometimes means doing the unpopular thing, even when everyone around you is loading their rifles.